Professor of History at the Department of History, Center for Advanced Studies, University of Calcutta. He is also the former head of the Department of History and the present MPhil coordinator at Calcutta University. Professor Dey has also served as a visiting professor at Northeastern Hill University and Vishwabharati University. He is also the co-editor of the Bengali academic journal Itikatha and the resident editor of Indo-Iranica. The Comprehensive History the Comprehensive History of India Society has selected him as the joint editor for Volume 10. Dr. Dey has published over 50 articles on Islam and Islamic mysticism in academic journals and has delivered lectures in many reputed institutions, both in India and abroad. Some of his published works include The Image of the Prophet in Bengali Muslim Piety 1850 to 1947, published in 2006, and Islam in South Asia, published in 2016. We look forward with eager anticipation to today's lecture. Without further delay, over to you, sir.
Thank you, Srija, for a very generous introduction. I am particularly grateful to the Department of History, Presidency University, for inviting me very kindly to share my views on my research. I was actually delighted to be invited by one of the most vibrant history departments of the country. I have many friends in the department, and I am also familiar with some of the senior students who passed out from this department and later joined the MPhil program in our department. We could recognize that how beautifully they had been groomed in the history department of Presidency University. So we have long ties actually. Even when Presidency University was a college, there was a constant interaction. So actually this will be my second lecture in my academic career to be delivered in Presidency. But the first one was delivered when Presidency was a leading college, and now I am delivering a lecture when Presidency is emerging as a leading university in the country. Now, without wasting much time, I would like to share my views on the topic which has been announced already, that is traversing the countryside through the prophet-oriented folk songs of colonial Bengal, which also confirms the time frame we are trying to address. Actually, you will understand why I have picked up such a topic as we progress. And it will take time because there are different dimensions here, because different types of folk songs would be handled. But I will not pick up the folk songs according to their categories, but I shall rather approach the folk songs thematically so that we can be argumentative. And when I finish my lecture, if you have any query, I'll be delighted to respond. Actually, I have to explain why I have picked up the countryside when I'm deciding to discuss on Islam or folk songs, Islam-oriented folk songs and stuff. Why I have picked up the countryside, I must explain. It has sometimes been claimed that Islam flourishes in a quasi-urban setting, centering around the mosques, the bazaars, and the qasbas, small towns, as you know. The present study questions the claim and focuses on some prophet-oriented folk songs, which became popular in the Bengal countryside during the 19th and 20th centuries, as you can understand from the title of my talk today. Now, I'm not claiming that this is unique in Bengal. You will find this type of folk songs almost throughout the Islamic world, particularly in the countrysides of the Islamic world. Then what's the point of picking up such a topic? We have to justify our intervention here. For example, you will find this sort of songs in the Middle East, in North Africa, and in other places, in Indonesia as well. But also, I draw your attention to the fact that try to understand the various geocultural situations, eco-geographical situations. So in terms of using symbols, this can be an important clue for us why symbols could vary under differing circumstances. But what I'm trying to argue is that in spite of the presence of such folk songs throughout the Islamic world, particularly in the countryside, this sort of uh, literature, folk literature, still awaits historical study, conceptual study. But if we carry out this project, it will be easier for us to understand, to explore various facets of Islam and Muslim societies, not only in Bengal, I mean undivided Bengal, but also in other places of the world where you have Muslim population. Now, I will be excluding deliberately and consciously, I will be excluding the urban pockets today. But still, I cannot resist the temptation that if you have to study the urban pockets of the Islamic world, there are other forms of literature, not necessarily this sort of folk songs. You can understand, and I will have the occasion to discuss that a little bit further. If you have to encapsulate the urban pockets of the Islamic civilizations, there you will find Sirat literature, biographies of the Prophet. They are available in printed form. So, uh, actually, literacy rate is higher in the urban pockets. So, if you have printed versions of the biographies of the Prophet, that would suffice. But that sort of a literature would not work, at least during the colonial period in the countryside. You can understand that. So, Sirat literature became popular mainly in the urban pockets of South Asia and also other parts of the Islamic world. But in the countryside, it was a different ball game, um, because you will find semi-literate or non-literate people in the countryside. Visual and oral transmission would be very important in the countryside. Sirat literature would not work because printing technology can be effective in the urban pockets, not in the countryside. So that's why I will also gravitate more towards the countryside, because when you find literature on 19th century awakening in South Asia, our discussion concentrates on the urban pockets like Calcutta, Aligarh, and other places, Delhi, Lucknow, other places, but not necessarily the countryside. We do not bring the countryside within the ambit of our survey. So today, uh, I will try to explore that less traversed region for a better understanding of our socio-cultural past. Uh, Now, you will understand that this sort of a source materials you will find beyond the archives, and you need to understand the socio-economic and political changes um, by relying on such sources, not exclusively but partially. But this partial survey of such sources could be extremely valuable. We shall discuss that as we progress. These rhythmic folk songs were easier to memorize. We were speaking about visual and oral transmission. So for the non-literate people, semi-literate people, memorization is important. They cannot browse through the pages again and again and again, as is possible with Sirat literature, accessible to the urban counterparts of these folks. Um, so oral transmission was important. Rural masses would not have access to print. So music, poetry, songs, and even some sort of bodily gestures like dance would help so far as transmission of this sort of folk knowledge is concerned or mystical knowledge is concerned. And now there are other dimensions. We shall have occasions to refer to that. So when we refer to music and dance, it had implications that we shall mention. Now you know that since the late 18th century, I will not go delve deep into that, but you all know that since the late 18th century, there was something like what you call Islamic revivalist movements, Tariqa-i Muhammadiyya movements, that is the path of Muhammad, back to the path of Muhammad, Faraizi movement in eastern Bengal. These sort of movements were there from 19th century onwards. Uh, but still, we can contest the effectiveness of such revivalist movements, because this sort of folk traditions, syncretistic traditions, had been moving from strength to strength throughout the 19th century, which is confirmed by the presence and celebration of the likes of Lalon Shah and many others. as you can understand. Uh, Actually, these sort of revivalist movements could not eliminate the folk tradition, the mystical tradition from the Bengal countryside. So this confirms that they were moving from strength to strength, at least throughout the 19th century. Things started to change from the 20th century. We may or may not have the time to discuss that, but definitively during the interactive session, I would be delighted to respond to such debates and controversies regarding the prospect of folk culture in the Bengal countryside with a mystical orientation. Now, unlike you can understand, unlike Islamic revivalist movements, popular Islam assimilated many local traditions and naturally became invigorated. The numerous prophet oriented folk songs may be taken as an illustration. Now, our starting point is 1850s. 1850s. Why? The decade 1850s is significant in many ways in the history of colonial rule in South Asia. In this decade, the first major upsurge against colonial rule had to be suppressed. Steamers started plying on the Ganges on a regular basis from this decade, and you will find the comparatively easy availability of folk songs, sometimes in printed form, from this decade. So this is a significant decade, and for other reasons also, I don't have the time to include all, and we shall stop by 1940s, 1947 to be more precise. You know why? Because Bengal was divided by that time. India was divided as well. So we will be concerned with the last 100 years of undivided Bengal. And again, we shall be focusing upon the countryside. The folk poets, as well as the representatives of high classical literature, know that the prophet is the meaning and the end of creation, and that he will be the one to guide them to eternal life, just like a caravan leader. Mire Karwa, caravan leader. Now, in Jami's poetry also you will find this Mire Karwa or Shatarban. Ye Shatarban, Ahistaran. Oh, camel driver, please move slowly. I cannot keep pace with you. So in the desert region also, prophet is imagined as Mire Karwa or camel driver, who is supposed to take the soul safely from one end of the desert to another. So this sort of folk songs you would find in the Middle Eastern region and in parts of Northern Africa as well. Similarly, in the melodious folk songs of riverine Bengal, so let us now move from desert prone region to riverine Bengal. Muhammad, the mystical leader, appears as the boatman, not as Mire Karwa, as the boatman or as the helmsman who carries the soul safely to the other shore. This is very much important. So, this is the innovative, improvising nature of the folk poets, but it's a travesty that when we discuss about the awakening of India in the 19th century, we do not bring them within the ambit of our survey. So I call them folk intellectuals or folk philosophers, but they are excluded from our survey, and that is demonstrated in the curriculum that we introduce at the postgraduate level in our universities. But now things are changing, hopefully. Now, there are various forms of folk songs, as I have already indicated. Uh, I will not describe all because all of you know something about the Baul songs. If you undertake a journey from Howrah to Bolpur, the train will be frequented by Bauls as you cross Bardwan. I don't have to describe them much, but there are other categories which demand some explanation, some extrapolation. There, apart from Baul songs, there are Jari songs. Actually, in Bengali, we don't write Z. So, Zaridan, Persian word, Zaridan means lamentation, has become Jari, Burgyo Jari in Bengali. Maij Bhandari songs of Chittagong. Maij Bhandari is a place. So, the Fokiri songs of Maij Bhandar, they became popular as Maij Bhandari songs. Feminine songs, Meli Git, feminine songs. So these are some of the categories which we are going to discuss briefly today, uh, to just check our hypothesis that Islam can flourish with all its vitality even in a rural setting. And then you have the day laborers songs, মেহনতি মানুষের গান. You have the rain inviting songs, rain songs or rain inviting songs, বৃষ্টি ডাকার গান. এই গানগুলো খুব ইম্পর্টেন্ট, we shall study them. Bowls belong to a community of mendicant singers, known for their liberal attitude to all religions, as you know. Now, apart from Sufism, they were also influenced by Vaishnavism, which you will discover when you travel from Howrah to Bolpur. However, they were neither Hindus nor Muslims and were also opposed to the caste system. Some charismatic Baul singers might be familiar. That is Lalon Shah, who died in 1891, a contemporary of Raja Ram Mohan Roy, who had lived for nearly 120 years. Panju Shah, another Baul singer, born in 1851. Lalon's disciple Duddu Shah, they are some of the charismatic Baul singers. I will not name all. Now, I will also not mention here because there's a time constraint. We should have some discussion after the lecture. I shall also not mention the districts where the Bauls flourished. You can imagine, of course, there are districts in eastern Bengal as well as western Bengal uh, where Bauls became prominent. Now, I would say something about the dress, but nowadays, as you know, they are painted like people wearing saffron colored gown like dress. Actually, original Bauls did not wear this sort of a dress. Um, Actually, after Vivekananda became very popular with the saffron in Chicago, these commercial bowls started to just borrow that color, saffron color. But actually, originally initiated bowls would wear uh, a jobba, white in color. That is very much significant, like the Sufis, like many Sufis. And the bowls trace their origin from the Chistis, and you know the Chistis are known for their love for music and dance, and the Bowls also justify their association with the Chistis by their uh, love for proclivity towards songs and music, as you can understand. And they often carry a single string musical instrument, you know, it's called ektara. But my argument is that I draw your attention to the fact that a multidisciplinary approach is very productive, useful in our discipline also, because you will understand that actually just it demands some explanation. This one single string musical instrument is very cheap. It can be manufactured from something available easily in the Bengal countryside. Now this poses a challenge, symbolic challenge to Ashraf uh, aristocracy or Ashraf identity, that is integral to the identity formation process of the non-Ashraf or the Ajraf population of the Bengal countryside. That they can be a part of music and other forms of celebration, other forms of entertainment, and they have their own indigenous mechanism. Because you know, Ashraf tradition, they have a proclivity towards classical music, and those musical instruments are very expensive. And to receive training in that sort of a music is also very expensive, as you know, because the Ostad will demand a handsome honorarium. But common people, the fishermen, the peasants, the day laborer, they cannot afford that. So they have their own mechanism to be a part of the identity formation process which engulfed the Bengal countryside. So this establishment of Ektara and its popularity just signifies that aspect of identity formation. It's a very simple musical instrument, but it poses a silent challenge to Ashraf identity. Now, I draw your attention to this fact because I will not be discussing language movement, because you know it will be celebrated in December because of the historical juncture that we are approaching. relating to Bangladesh, of course, but you will understand language movement better if you understand the symbolic significance of these sort of musical instruments, which became integral to the identity formation process of the rural people in the Bengal countryside. So, do this sort of an exercise. There are many students today that uh, these sort of instruments, simple instruments, they demand some explanation, interpretation, and extrapolation for a proper understanding of the countryside and the identity formation process that incorporated the common people, non-literate or semi-literate people in the countryside. So it also illustrates the subtle tension prevalent in the Bengal countryside between Ashraf identity and indigenous local or Ajlaf identity. We shall explain some of these aspects as we proceed. British land policy and the destruction of crafts industries caused impoverishment, which swelled the ranks of mendicant singers. You will find in many of the Baul songs that they are using titles like Dewan, that once upon a time they were associated with Zamindari, but now they are landless, they are penniless, and they are joining the ranks of mendicant singers. And these Bauls were not social reformers, but they fought against social inequality. That is, they fought for justice. Very important. Adal means justice. Adalat has emerged from the word adal. You know about the Naushirwane Adil of pre-Islamic Persia. So adal is very important, a term which is popularized also in Sufi akhlaq literature. Why I'm saying that? So my another argument is that um, with the establishment of colonial rule and with the decline and degeneration of the Mughals, suddenly the broad, inclusive, liberal Indo-Islamic tradition or Persianate tradition did not vanish. It continued in one way or other. My argument is that it was preserved to some extent within the local folk traditions. So you will find this sort of quest for justice in the Baul songs and other forms of folk songs as well. Just like you find that akhlaq type of literature uh, popularized by the Sufis in their texts, mainly written in Persian and later on in many vernacular languages. But remember, those Sufi ventures were confined to uh, literary activities. They were available in either in manuscript form or in visible form. Later on, they got printed from late 18th or early 19th century. They got printed in Urdu and other languages. But this is not possible, I have mentioned, in the Bengal countryside and other countrysides as well. For example, this case will be similar in Upper Indian countryside, where the Barelvi ulama played a very significant role. But I am not going to explore the commonalities between the Barelvis and the Bauls. Some commonalities are there because they were operative sometimes in the countryside. So they addressed this social inequality. They fought for justice, though they were not social reformers or religious reformers. They fought against the prevalent hatred in the countryside, as I have mentioned, the tension involving the Ashraf and the Ajlaf. They fought against some form of corruption through their songs. So these are important social documents. Now then, let us move to the Jari songs quickly. Jari is a kind of dirge which owes its origin to the tragic events of Karbala, as you know, where Hazrat Hussein, the beloved grandson of the Prophet, died like a martyr. So these are Karbala songs full of lamentation, very significant in the colonial milieu because the Bengali speaking people could identify their plight with the Karbala episode because the colonial regime replaced the regime of Sirajuddaulah. So here in some of the Jari songs, Sirajuddaulah was projected as Hussein and Robert Clive as Yazid. Very interesting. The Shia community of South Asia commemorate the events of Karbala the month of Muharram by singing marsiyas or DJs. In Upper India, they are called marsiyas in Urdu. uh, I am not going into marsiya, but I can say, if I simplify, that jari can be regarded as the Bengali version of marsiya. But marsiya could be popular in the qasbas, in the small towns, but jari is mostly popular in the countryside. This is the difference. And there are some other differences. I will not be going into that because I have some other types of songs to describe. Uh, Now, both valor and pathos characterize these Jari songs, as you can understand, which depicts the unparalleled heroism of Hussein and his followers in the tragic battle of Karbala, that you can understand. And symbol is very important in Shia tradition. So I draw your attention to this fact that the Sufis are mainly Sunnis, but they use Shia symbols because it is easier to articulate their situation, their plight, by using Shia symbols. Now, similarly, in the Bengal countryside, majority of the Muslims are Sunnis, but Shia symbolism is used. We shall have occasions to come back to that very soon. Uh, Jari has still maintained its popularity among the Hindus. This is the interesting side of the story, and the Muslims, uh, both in India and Bangladesh. But the pattern is changing. I will not delve deep into that because that issue is a little bit controversial, because we are seeing that this sort of outburst of communal riots here and there in the subcontinent. So I don't want to discuss about the metamorphosis of the Jari songs in the post-independence phase. And I have also said that I'm going to speak about the colonial period, not about the post-colonial period. But I know what is happening in the post-colonial period. uh, in the interactive session, you can be inquisitive. Now, in Jashore and Khulna, you will find that Jari is not used as a religious song, but as a seasonal song. So I draw your attention to this heterogeneous approach to folk songs. That sometimes the same song can be used as a religious song. On other occasions, in other districts, that same song can be treated as seasonal song. That's a secular dimension comes in. Very important. And not treated as a religious song. Not sung during the Muharram only, but even it is sung during particular season. Now, as I have already indicated, that the battle of Plassey is often compared with the tragic battle of Karbala. So the Bengali speaking people, and this is not surprising because in Murshidabad also, Jari songs became very popular because of the patronage it received from the Nawabs. Many of these Nawabs are Persian, uh, of Persian origin and of Shia origin. This is interesting. Persian and Shia origin. So they popularized this sort of Muharram celebration. So there's a typical Shia type of Muharram celebration which you will find in 18th century Awadh as well, and also in Murshidabad. But it attracted the attention of the Hindus, Sunnis, so on, because the notion of citizenship was broadly defined in those days for the benefit of the rulers. And that's another aspect. I will not discuss that. I will concentrate on the folk songs and how it acted as a social document in the colonial milieu. Jari also, like the Baul songs, reflect the grievances of the rural population against the prevalent social and economic disparities. Jari is to be sung. Look at the difference between Baul songs and Jari songs. Baul songs are mostly solo performances. As I have mentioned, when you are undertaking a journey from Howrah to Bolpur, you will encounter a Baul singing alone, not in a group, not necessarily in a group, and that is not possible in an AC railway compartment. So Jari is to be sung in a group. This is interesting, and to be more precise, between two groups, two contesting groups, to be more precise, which can create a dramatic atmosphere in village performances. Otherwise, life is monotonous. They have to toil very hard in the countryside. Either they are fishermen, day laborer, or peasants. They have to toil very hard. Their life is more or less monotonous. So to provide a dramatic atmosphere, So there's a Jari song just represents a form of contest, group contest between two contesting groups. So to provide a theatrical environment in a rural setting. Jari songs are sung to the accompaniment of dancing and musical instruments such as dhol, you know what is a dhol, shenai, you know what is a shenai, cymbal or kortal, harmonium, tabla, etc. Now I draw your attention again to this fact, this popularity of dance and music. I leave something for your own judgment. Do you think nowadays music and dance are facing any challenge in the countryside? This is my query. You try to find out your own answer. I'm not going to answer all your queries. But this sort of investigation is very important to understand history, to reconstruct socio-cultural past. In the post-colonial period, my query is that do you find any challenge being posed against this sort of music and dance in the countryside, South Asian countryside? By South Asian countryside, I definitively mean that it crosses the boundaries of India. So this is very important. And if so, what's the reason why music and dance are facing challenge? Uh, but when I celebrate this music and dance, I would draw your attention that our multidisciplinary approach is very important. The way I have interpreted the ektara, that single string resembles the letter alif, alif for Allah. So it's a sort of a spiritual intoxication to be united with the Supreme Being. Fana, fana, concept of fana, simplified in the folk form for the common people who would not read Sufi literature but would listen to Sufi type of literature. Sufism inspired literature would be listened to by them in the form of songs, in the performance of dance and so on. So some sort of communication is there in the countryside. Now, Rabindranath Tagore, Gandhi, Nazrul Islam understood the significance of music and dance. Music and dance pose a serious challenge to hegemonic orthodoxy. Serious challenge to hegemonic orthodoxy. So you can understand now what was happening in the Bengal countryside. It will be further clear if you watch the film Moner Manush by Gautam Ghosh. So without explaining everything, I am just illustrating briefly to ignite your spirit of inquiry. Now let us discuss briefly the Maij Bhandari songs. We know something about the bowls, we know a little about the Jari songs, but probably we don't know about the Maij Bhandari songs of Chittagong. As I've mentioned, it's a place in Chittagong, Maij Bhandar. They are Marifati Fakirs. Marifati, you know, esoteric Fakirs uh, of Chittagong. And they are also called Maij Bhandari Fakirs because of the place name. However, it should be mentioned that the Maij Bhandari singers were not merely confined to Chittagong. They would spill over to other areas, including Dhaka. The Maij Bhandari singers used to have a Murshid, spiritual guide, and to a large extent, they functioned like a Sufi sect. Functioned like a Sufi sect. Another interesting thing about the Maij Bhandaris is that the Maij Bhandaris used to grow long hair. Ask yourself this query: why they grow long hair, and whether there is any challenge again in the post-colonial period against this sort of long hair in the countryside of South Asia. If so, what's the implication? Ask yourself this question. They grow long hair on their heads and were fond of smoking hookah. Hookah is a symbol of indigenous identity, local identity. Now, in Hasuli Baker Upakatha, you found the tension between some sort of Western culture, Anglicized culture, and sort of a local culture, some sort of subtle tension. Here, in the identity formation process, the Maij Bhandaris of Chittagong, they are putting emphasis on the local symbols of culture. Very interesting, right? They would not accept cigarette or biri. They would rather prefer hookah. It's a local tradition. They're putting emphasis on hookah. Contemporary socio-economic conditions were reflected in the Mai Bhandari songs, just like the case of Baul songs and Jari songs. Now, if you speak about the religious themes, cosmogony featured prominently in the Mai Bhandari songs, and it also featured prominently in the Jari and Baul songs. Now, this cosmogony is a bone of contention. Stephen Hawking speaks about cosmogony. All the major religious scriptures speak about cosmogony. The folk singers speak about cosmogony. This is very interesting. Without solving the riddle, I keep you under tension, under suspense. Just think why there is so much attention on cosmogony throughout the ages in human history, if you have to understand socio-cultural history. Now, let us focus our attention to the themes of songs relating to the Prophet. I mean, Prophet Muhammad. One I have just now mentioned, cosmogonical songs, Srishti Tattva, creation theory, cosmogonical or cosmological songs. Number two, theme number two, we shall not discuss all, some. We are very selective here because of the time constraint. Noor Muhammadi, or the light of Muhammad. Noor Muhammad concept was popularized by the Sufis as well, the Barelvi ulama of Upper India as well, the Bauls and the Jari singers and the Maijbhandari singers as well. There's a focus on Noor Muhammadi. I have to explain what is Noor Muhammad. There was a primordial light. It is believed by the believers that one is Nurullah, light of Allah. So one day, the Prophet, God has created another light from his own light, and that is Nur Muhammad. And for the comfort of Nur Muhammad, everything else had been created. Water, earth, air, everything else had been created for the comfort of Nur Muhammad. So Nur Muhammad is the cause, and the creation of anything else was the effect. So this is the cosmogonical aspect. And interestingly, when the Christian missionaries were preaching in the countryside, like Nodia, and even if you go to Krishnanagar in Nodia, you will find Church Missionary Society, which demonstrates that Christian missionaries had been active in the Bengal countryside. And there are other places. The nearest chapel, so far as Calcutta is concerned, you will find in Krishnanagar. So, and again, in the Testament also, the Christian missionaries preached that the world was created through Jesus Christ. So, for the time being, I will not keep you in suspense for long, but for the time being, just try to think that the Christian missionaries are saying that the world was created through Jesus. The protagonists of Nur Muhammadi concept, they are also saying that the world was created because of the Prophet. What does that mean? And another category is that is Muhammad the intercessor. Remember that in the places of origin, Sufism has virtually disappeared. In Middle East, North Africa, Central Asia, Sufism has virtually disappeared. Or if not, or if it is existing, if it is prevalent, it is facing stiff challenge from the protagonists of scriptural fundamentalism. Because Sufism represents ecstatic and intercessory dimension of Sufism, of mystical experience, mystical behavior. Ecstatic and intercessory Sufism face challenge from the protagonists of scriptural fundamentalism. So there's an element of tension in our discussion as well. But history is a conversation between the past and the present. It enables us to understand some present developments and perhaps future developments. So that's why this sort of communication is important. So I draw your attention to such tensions, such subtle tensions. Why Muslims are killing Muslims. For example, in 2014 in Cairo, some 304 Muslims had been massacred by Muslims, and this was done in a in a mosque. Why? Those 304 Muslims had Sufi orientation, believed in, they were Muslims, practicing Muslims. They used to go to churches, I mean mosques, but um, they believed in ecstatic and intercessory Sufism. That was their guilt, and for that they were not spared by the self-styled custodians of scriptural fundamentalism. And they also instruct the people not to go to the pyramids and museums. And then another type of things you will notice in the folk songs: socio-economic and political issues. Socio-economic and political issues you will find in folk songs. Now, let us very briefly discuss those things. We have to proceed fast. Bauls or the Maijbhandaris were singing songs on the concept of Nuri Muhammadi, I have mentioned, presenting the Prophet Muhammad and his mediatorship of creation as a source of authority. So, Nur Muhammad is a source of authority. In doing so, Bauls or the Maijbhandaris were probably responding in a subconscious way to the missionary enterprise, as I've already implied or indicated, aiming at enhancing the status of Jesus Christ and Christianity as compared to Islam and its prophet. So there's a sort of competitive spirituality. So folk songs did not always represent syncretism, composite culture. There could be an element of competitive spirituality in folk songs as well. So this is one important dimension. I will mention one Baul song where you will notice the assertion of radical Islam as well. So all Baul songs are not a representation of unalloyed syncretism in the Bengal countryside. That is my humble submission. So this Lalon song is saying, we are giving an example of the how this concept of Nur Muhammad was brought into play. The sky, I am quoting Lalon in English, the sky, the earth, and the wind together with water are all born of his luminous spirit. Lalon Shah, Lalon Shah sings. And again, let us now focus upon a Jari song. Now, Gabriel or Jibril appeared before Fatima, the beloved daughter of the Prophet. This is a Jari song. I'm simplifying it. Fatima addressed Gabriel or Jibril as Choto Chacha. Choto Chacha. You know what is Choto Chacha. Gabriel was annoyed. He said, you should address me as Boro Chacha. I'm senior to your father, the Prophet. They appeared before the Prophet. The Prophet asked Gabriel whether he had seen anything when he was born. Gabriel said, yes, when I was born, I looked at the horizon and found a starry light. The Prophet instantly replied that I was that starry light, Nur Muhammad, light of Muhammad. So he tried to demonstrate that the Prophet pre-existed Gabriel. So this is the uh, legitimizing approach by using a source of authority from the theology and also mixing it with mystical ideas, mystical uh, metamorphosis. It was being presented to the folks in the countryside. So this sort of contest, competition is there in the folk songs. It's not always an example of unalloyed syncretism. This is my humble submission. A few days ago, or rather months ago, Professor Francis Robinson delivered a wonderful lecture in your department. You have invited my supervisor. He asked me that you are looking into Baul songs, you are looking into Jari songs. Also, try to find out whether they demonstrated the growth of radical Islam in the Bengal countryside. Because true literature, good literature, quality literature is also a reflection of the contemporary developments. And I found, yes, that happened in the Baul songs, in the Jari songs. They should not be projected as songs, as folk songs, which represented unalloyed syncretism in the Bengal countryside. That would be ahistorical to say that. So These are some of the examples, and uh, let us now move to the Maij Bhandari songs. Maij Bhandaris with buffaloes, they sometimes perform yoga on the back of the buffalo. Very interesting. Now there's debate in Southeast Asia whether yoga is a Hindu custom or whether Muslims can perform yoga. Nizamuddin Aulia had no such problem. Nizamuddin Aulia had performed breathing exercises, learnt it from the yogis. Pranayam, you call it pranayam. So he had no such problem. Great musician Alauddin Khan had no such problem. He used to utter the word Ma Kali, and he was a devout Muslim. He prayed 5 times a day, but he worshipped Saraswati, he worshipped goddess Kali, and he also prayed 5 times a day. Alauddin Khan. 50% of his um, children had been given Islamic names, other 50% got non-Islamic names. So this is the actual story of composite culture. Where is that culture now in the post-colonial period? So these Maij Bhandaris, they perform yoga, used to perform yoga on the back of the buffaloes. They resembled cowherd Krishna or shepherd prophets. Uh, Now there is songs like that throughout the Islamic world and also in rural Bengal. I cannot recognize the light, that is the Noor, which was responsible for the creation of this universe. One Mike Bandari singer is saying. When the Arabic letter Mim, Mim is an Arabic letter, Mim for Muhammad, you know. Mim is put in the middle of the word Ahad. Ahad means one God, singular, one God. If you put the letter, Arabic letter Mim, in the middle of the word Ahad, Ahad becomes Ahmad. That is, God becomes Muhammad. So, prophet's proximity or human proximity to God is celebrated, established, confirmed by this play of letters, Arabic letters. And this was done by the folk singers as well. So, sometimes you can doubt whether these folk poets or folk philosophers were totally non literate or not, because they were playing with such Arabic words and perfectly, just like their counterparts in other parts of the Islamic world. So if you put the letter Mim in the middle of the word Ahad, Ahad becomes Ahmad. That is, God becomes Muhammad. uh, I see the spiritual birth of Ahmad. That is another name of Muhammad. You can understand. The Supreme Lord is playing with divine light. That is Noor. And the mystery of that game is not known to me. So I desire to go into hiding. Maij Bhandari song. Seeing the ripples in the ocean of love, I forget the separation between God and man. Just I have said how Ahad became Ahmad or Ahmad became Ahad. The divine light is a reflection of divine majesty, Jalal, and divine beauty, Jamal, since it represents God and Muhammad at the same time. However, I cannot see the reality of God. I have argued, one of my hypotheses was that the Indo-Persian tradition, the Persianate tradition was preserved sometimes in the folk tradition, in spite of the demise of the Mughal Empire and in spite of the emergence of the colonial hegemony. We find that Indo-Persian culture, tradition was preserved in the corners of folk tradition, folk culture. So you see the word Jalal, not a Bengali word, Jamal, not a Bengali word. They are preserved in the exquisitely beautiful folk songs of the Bengal countryside. Jalali Jamali Khela Khelche Boshe Malik Maula Lukaiya Roi. I don't understand the mystery, so I go into hiding. Jalali Jamali Khela Khelche Boshe Malik Maula Lukaiya Roi. Maij Bhandari song. Uh, the intercessory role of Jesus figures prominently in the New Testament, I have indicated, which has given a higher position to Jesus than Moses. So there's a spiritual hierarchy created by the preachers as a mediator between God and man. So it is not difficult to understand that in an age of religious competition, folk Islam will put great emphasis on the intercessory role of Muhammad to establish him as a source of authority in the Bengal countryside. Jahir Ali, a relatively unknown baul in the Bengal countryside during the colonial period, late 19th century, sings in tune with this spirit. The worried and pensive Jahir Ali says that the day of judgment will be troublesome. If you want to cross the Sirat bridge, that's a slender bridge just connecting this side with heaven. Uh, Sirat bridge, you can cross the Sirat bridge. If you wish to cross the Sirat bridge safely, look for an advocate now. In New Testament, Jesus is also projected as an advocate. Here, Prophet Muhammad is being projected as an advocate in the folk songs. So you notice the competitiveness of this religious preaching or this folk tradition. Lalon sings on another occasion, I mean Lalon Shah. If you choose the Prophet as your helmsman, your boat will not sink in the storm. The boat of faith is propelled by love and moves day and night without wind. In an era of social, economic, and political decay, the Hindus sought peace and solace by composing songs dedicated to goddess Kali, the goddess of power, when the real power was in the hands of the colonial authority. A little later, that is during the 19th century, the Muslims also discovered their empowered mother in the form of Fatima, the beloved daughter of the Prophet, who is more popularly known as Ma Barkat, the auspicious mother in the Fakiri tradition of Bengal, in 19th century Bengal. We may not now turn to the full Sirater Jari, which states when Bibi Fatima will hear the believers have fallen in hell on the day of judgment, she will appear before God to seek her mercy. So, intercessory role is not only reserved for the Prophet, there is the incorporation of Fatima in Bengali imagination as the intercessor alongside her father, the Prophet. And here the Fatima is emerging as the counterpart of Kali and sometimes as the counterpart of Saraswati, because in those days when you used to perform Jari songs, there was the veneration of Fatima, who was not an accomplished musician, but there was a veneration of Fatima during that same performance, both by Hindus and Muslims, and Fatima and Saraswati. Saraswati is known to be an accomplished musician, though she is not a historical personality. So, veneration of Fatima, veneration of Saraswati. So, Fatima is emerging as a counterpart of Saraswati, counterpart of Kali. Kali Ghater Kali Ma, Hai Ali, Hai Fatima. So, but nowadays, my query is that in the post colonial period, if you go to the countryside, if you listen to a Jari song, there may be a veneration of Fatima, may not be as Ma Barkat, but there still can be a veneration of Fatima, she being the mother of Hassan and Hussein. But is there any veneration of Saraswati in the Jari performance? If not, why not? I leave the question for you. How would you interpret that? But I am not discussing post colonial period, I have assured you earlier. Now, let us discuss some socio-economic and political issues in songs. I have mentioned that there are some baul songs which represented this sort of, or at least demonstrated the advent of radical Islam in the Bengal countryside. Nasaruddin, actually it should be Nasiruddin. It has been Bengalicized, so Nasiruddin has become Nasaruddin. Nasaruddin, who belongs to this group of mystic poets, sings, "The Muslims of Bengal are no better than the forest dweller." For lack of time, I am not reciting it in Bengali. I am just providing you with the English version. The Muslims of Bengal are no better than the forest dweller. They do not follow the hadith, that is the sayings and deeds of the Prophet, or the Quran. They have plunged themselves in usury, bribery, and adultery. Here, the females do not observe the veil, still, people receive food from their hands. Men regard it fashionable to keep beard in tune with the European style. Albert Chate Dari Raken. Men are also wearing shirts, coats, wristwatches. They are also using spectacles, chewing betel leaf, and smoking biri. That is the cheap cigarette of rolled leaf. instead of hookah. We have seen in case of the Maij Bhandari songs, they are using hookah, and this time they are switching over to biri. The traditional Tahawan cap is also becoming obsolete. This is the lamentation of Nasaruddin, who is noticing de-Islamization in the Bengal countryside, and he is also a baul singer. So these sort of examples are there where you will find the change that was taking place in the Bengal countryside. Though syncretism was there, but whether it was unalloyed syncretism, that was questionable. The Muslims of Bengal have deviated from the Sunnah customs of the Prophet, which shocks the poet, I mean Nasaruddin. Songs such as this had great historical significance as they reflected a shift in the Muslim attitude from syncretistic and mystical Islam towards reformist Islam. A jari entitled The Hospitality of Kulsum, Kulsumer Mezbani, actually Mezbani, in Persian it would be Mezbani, but in Bengali sized version it has become Mezbani because Z is not pronounced in Bengali. Kulsumer Mezbani, Hospitality of Kulsum. Now, I will just be very brief. It's a song. I'm just giving you the essence of this Jari song. Kulsum is the wife of Usman, one of the caliphs, as you know, one of the great four caliphs. Usman was very rich because he was a merchant. So Kulsum has been uh, depicted as a rich personality in the Bengal countryside, the representative of Ashraf community. Now Kulsum did not invite her sister Fatima and her two sons, Hassan and Hussein, in a party, in a feast. So in a supernatural event, the foodstuff stored in the godown of Kulsum disappeared. Now Kulsum was ultimately, under the request of Prophet, Kulsum was ultimately forgiven by Fatima, Ma Barkat, or the auspicious mother I have mentioned. You will still find many Ma Barkate Than in the countryside, particularly eastern Bengal. But whether they are being attacked by the so-called or self-styled custodians of hegemonic orthodoxy or not, that you have to investigate. I am not going into that. So ultimately she was forgiven by Fatima, and it was shown that Fatima, Ali, that is Fatima's husband, son-in-law of the Prophet, Ali, Damadam Mas Kalandar, Ali the Pahla number. Ali and Fatima are very popular in the mystical tradition of South Asia and also elsewhere, because most of the Sufi orders trace their genealogy from Ali and Fatima, excepting the Naqshbandis. I'm not going into that. So this is interesting. Fatima, Ali, the Prophet, Hassan and Hussein, so 5 persons. These 5 persons taken together are known in Shia tradition as Pak Panjatan, 5 holy persons. Very striking similarity with indigenous tradition. 5 is a holy number to the Sikhs, Pach Piara. 5 is a holy number to the Hindus, Pancho Pandav, Pancho Pradeep. And Durga visits annually with 4 companions annually. So 5 is a holy number. So this is a very creative appropriation of an existing holy number, 5, Pak Panjatan. That is a Shia tradition. I earlier mentioned that Shia traditions are used by the esoteric religions, particularly mystics, Muslim mystics. This is an example. The 5 is a holy number. And there are 5 rivers in Punjab as well. In riverine culture also, this Pak Panjatan concept became very popular. Punjab, 5 rivers. Panj means 5. Ab means water, rivers. So this 5 is very important. So now, not only these 5 holy persons who went to the house of Kulsum, forgave Kulsum, it was a huge success. That feast was a huge success. But I draw your attention to the fact that this Pak Panjatan had been accompanied by Peer Mother. Peer Mother was not mentioned in the Quran. Peer Mother is a local peer. So you have to understand the tension, subtle tension between the universal symbols of religion and the local symbols of religion. Understanding that is important to understand the identity formation process of the local people. And Pir Mother was projected as the son of Fatima. This is ahistorical, as you can understand. And then, not only that, Ganga is accompanying them. The Ganga was in charge of distributing water, drinking water in that feast, in that party. So this is the creative, imaginative appropriation and accommodation of local holy tradition. This is syncretism, a sort of syncretism prevalent in the colonial Bengali countryside. What happened to that tradition now? It's time to ask this question. How could it disappear? um, so here you can understand that Kulsum is the representative of the Ashraf community, and Fatima is the representative of the Ajlaf or the have-nots. And in the popular imagination, the have-nots emerge victorious. Fatima emerges victorious over Ashraf Kulsum. So, in this way, this tension between the Ashraf and the Ajlaf could be solved by the imaginative folk intellectuals of the Bengal countryside during the colonial period. uh, at the same time, the complexity should be highlighted here of the song. That is, there is also an emphasis on the performance of zakat. So when there's a celebration of local tradition, syncretistic tradition, at the same time there are renewed emphasis on some of the uh, compulsory duties of Islam, farz of Islam, like performance of zakat. Kulsum was not performing zakat, so he had to be punished, and ultimately she had to be forgiven by her sister Fatima. So I'm not going into that, but Fatima is being projected as Radha, God as Krishna, and Fatima as Radha. So Radha Krishnaism is being improvised in a Muslim society in this way by the projection of Fatima. So Fatima is representing Radha, Fatima is representing Saraswati, Fatima is representing Kali, Fatima is emerging as Ma Barkat. And now in a rain song that is demonstrated more explicitly. Now in the Oriental world, you can understand that rain is very important to ensure a harvest, a rich harvest. And even in Buddhist texts, you will find that Swadharma Pundoriko is projecting Lord Buddha as the merciful rain cloud. In the Islamic world, Prophet is projected as the rain cloud. And in Bengal, Fatima is the queen of cloud. Aire Megh Rani, ঠ্যাং ধুই ধুই ফেলা পানি, বিবি ফাতিমা খোঁজে পানি, আল্লাহ তুই দে রে পানি. So these sort of rain songs were there. So you see the empowerment of Fatima in the Bengali countryside. So this is very much important. This demonstrated the influence of Sufism so far as the development and sustenance of folk songs in the Bengal countryside is concerned. I translate that. Aire Megrani Tang Dui Dui Fela Pani, Bibi Fatima Koje Pani, Allah Tui Dere Pani. Welcome the Queen of Clouds. Make sure that the water falls upon earth after washing your legs and mouth. Bibi Fatima is in search of water. Oh God, you give that water. Now again, I have mentioned that I will say something about the contemporary socio-economic and political circumstances. What is said about the Mahajans or about the money lenders creating havoc in the Bengal countryside during the colonial period, as you know. In the real world, the possibility of paying the debt of a Mahajan moneylender is very remote. It's an impossible task. But there is a consolation in the world beyond, where everyone is deeply indebted to Allah, including that Mahajan, who is also indebted to Allah. Because the Allah is a greater Mahajan. So lesser Mahajan is the human Mahajan, and greater Mahajan is Allah. Everyone is indebted to Allah. Only Muhammad is capable of taking the entire burden of that eternal debt. So the image of the prophet was becoming popular in the countryside through the prophet-oriented folk songs. It's a baul song where some sort of peace, solace, and self-confidence had been provided to the rural folk who were perpetually under debt trap. That this sort of they can be rescued if the prophet is entreated. So they are not only folk philosophers; they are not only folk intellectuals. I would say that these folk singers, folk poets were also folk psychiatrists in the Bengal countryside, providing self confidence, providing a meaning to their everyday existence. So you can approach them like that. Lalon's disciple Dudusha, who flourished during the mid 19th century onwards, has challenged the validity of the fatwas that confirms, as I was indicating now and then, that fatwas were emerging. Fatwas were becoming an important part of your everyday existence, even in the Bengal countryside, which had a rich tradition, rich Fakiri tradition. The fatwas were issued by the traditionalist mullahs to ban music. I was mentioning that music and dance posed a serious challenge to hegemonic orthodoxy. Rabindranath was putting emphasis, Gandhi was putting emphasis on music in their ashram and stuff. Dudu Shah used to sing, when the Prophet entered into Medina, a small tambourine was played to welcome him. So Dudu asks whether there is any authentic source of issuing fatwa against music. So he is challenging this fatwa against music in the Bengal countryside. You will find more of them in Moner Manush of Gautam Ghosh, the film I have already mentioned. God is within you. This is another message that is being conveyed in the folk songs. The model of a perfect man is undoubtedly the Prophet, Insane Kamil, as the Baul Panjusha, another Baul, charismatic Baul, sings. If the human body is properly searched, it will be discovered that the Nur Muhammadi exists there to illuminate the human life. This is a very user friendly presentation of a theological perception. Those who cannot afford to perform the Hajj, they can perform God, they can perform pilgrimage within their body. If they properly search God, God is available within their body. So, uh, Sahojiya Buddhist and yogic influence, Hatha yogic influence could be manifested in this sort of endeavors in the Bengal countryside, creative endeavors in the Bengal countryside. This is interesting. This collaboration, creative collaboration between different traditions. The song is a perfect blending of the traditional concept of cosmogony associated with the Nur Muhammadi and the newly emerging man centric approach in folk songs. এমন মানব জনম আর কি হবে? It reminds us of the anthropocentrism of Renaissance, almost popular Renaissance. এমন মানব জনম আর কি হবে? Celebrate this life because you may not be born as a man once again. So this is the shift from otherworldliness to this worldly concern manifested in the folk songs, just as you have observed in popular Renaissance of Europe. Another song, The Prophet as a Passenger. As I've mentioned, 1850s was my starting point when the steamers started plying on the Ganges. An anonymous baul singer sings, ওই দেখো স্টিমার নূর নবী প্যাসেঞ্জার খোদে খোদা টিকিট কালেক্টর. You understand? But those who don't follow Bengali, for them I am translating. Behold that steamer where the prophet is the passenger and God himself is the ticket master. So new type of rules had been introduced, unleashed by the colonial regime, and common folks were being familiarized with this colonial milieu by uh, projecting God as the ticket collector and prophet as an ideal or model passenger on a steamer. So this is interesting. ওই দেখো steamer নূর নবী passenger খোদে খোদা ticket collector. But of course spiritual message is there. You can understand that the soul is supposed to travel safely from this shore to another shore if you act as a model passenger like the prophet. So model passenger here means that you follow the basic tenets of Islam, you perform like an ethical person. uh, time is ticking out. I said that I'll be speaking for an hour and then enable you to ask some question. So they can travel safely to the world beyond those ideal passengers. The ticket system was also a new introduction, as you can understand, and we have also shown some uh, elements of coexistence, creative engagements, collaboration, etc., in our songs, as well as challenges to that tradition. Now, this sort of coexistence and companionship, as I have mentioned in case of the accompaniment of Conga and Peer Mother, actually increased the vitality and popularity of folk Islam. Indeed, the custodians of Islamic culture in modern Bengal, including Bangladesh, have much to learn from these folk poets. Thank you for your patience. Now you can charge me with your questions. I'll be delighted to respond. I thank you all very much for your patient listening. Thank you.
Uh, Thank you, sir. Let me first and foremost, I thank you, special guest Professor Amit De, who, despite his busy schedule, has found time to grace his this web lecture series. Thank you for your very interesting and informative lecture. So now the floor is open for question answer, and may I request the audience for their questions one by one if they have. Okay. So first, Joita Ghosh,
Can I
go
ask the
ahead with your
question?
question.
Sir, I'm asking the question. I didn't type it.
Please, please, please ask.
Okay, sir. Sir, it was a wonderful lecture. Thank you. I have learned much from it. I have actually some questions. Like you have mentioned dance or music as performative tradition, part of folk tradition and performative tradition.